what is your sense of the lessons that will be taken if Suozzi wins, and what will be the lessons taken if Suozzi loses? Because I sort of feel like it's going to be the same lesson either way because of where the Democrats want to go.
Yeah, I think that's right. So, I mean, to compare this to the 2022 races, and this is both Santos and Lee Zeldin, as you mentioned, those races were actually somewhat more focused on these kind of parochial local issues to a certain extent. So it was about, crime in New York City, I guess, and its ramifications, as well as the migrant, busing situation, red state governors who are, sending migrants up north. This is what's unusual, I guess, about this race, or different from 2022. It's really about the southern border, the way the candidates, at least Suozzi Pilip, have talked about immigration. So not something that's really close to home. The migrant busing thing is definitely, kind of in the background, but at least in recent weeks, it's been, more about, her claiming that there's this invasion at the border, and that, Tom Suozzi is aligned with, a sort of open borders, policy-oriented party. And again, that's where the bipartisan border deal has kind of come into play. He's tried to use this as a cudgel to go on the attack against Pilip, and we'll see if that's really an effective strategy at all. I just, one other thing to mention here is, in terms of the takeaways from this race, the race is going to start all over again in 5 to 8 months. It's going to come up again in November, whoever wins. And Democrats have put a lot of money into this race. The House Majority PAC, which is closely aligned with Nancy Pelosi and leadership, have put over $7 million to back Suozzi. And if you talk to some progressives in the state of New York, they kind of are raising questions about just how much money is being spent on this one special election that's going to be redecided in several months, especially as those House leadership PACs have not been willing to really lift a finger for the progressive incumbents that are facing primary challenges from, AIPAC, other affiliates of the Israel lobby that, as we've seen from recent filings, are mainly GOP Republican donors.
Right.
So, okay. Yeah. So, but the point being here that this race, if the Democrats win it, will just basically just make it 2019 to 2013, right? I mean, it won't. Yeah. It could have an impact. I mean, Mayorkas, we just saw that Mayorkas vote, the impeachment, and it would stall, some of what the Republicans want to do, maybe arguably. But the real question is it worth that $7 million? And it sort of feels like there is a real intense sort of desire by the establishment, if you want to call it, of the Democratic Party, or at the very least, sort of the big money in the Democratic Party and the DMFI to weaponize the border. I mean, I think the fact that it's going to be this close, in my mind, seems to suggest that there's a failure here of whatever the strategy is in the nationalized strategy, because she's out there going, the border is in crisis. And he's out there going, yes, the border is in crisis. And if I get in there, I can't really do anything about it. Like, the argument that he's making about Israel right now is Israel's under threat by the Democratic Party. And so if you insert me inside the Democratic Party, I will fight that from within. I mean, this is just a bizarre type of strategy, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, just to underscore this, and to be perfectly clear, I mean, Suozzi is trying to essentially outflank his Republican candidate on the right on both these issues. He's saying the border is a problem, and Democrats wanted to do something about it, and Republicans didn't. All right, and then kind of the same with Israel. He's trying to shore up his credentials as the most pro-Israel candidate. And again, I just want to also make this other point in terms of the amount of funding that Democrats have poured into this, as you've mentioned, to really make this the centerpiece for the kind of mood setter heading into 2024. up until the 2 weeks before the election, Democrats were outspending Republicans almost 3-1. The Congressional Leadership Fund then came in at the last minute and were sort of forced to, and spent about $2 million on digital and TV ads. But they're still outspending Republicans almost 2-1. I mean, their hand isn't necessarily being forced here. Yeah,
and it's a toss-up, right? Which is insane, because we played a clip of Suozzi and Pilip on this program before at the debate, reading like just a paragraph of her climate change policy, like seemingly like having before this she had barely any public positions except pro-Israel stuff. She doesn't seem to have many core principles outside of that. And like what's also fascinating to me about this, and I'm curious, like Luke, if you came across this in your reporting, where is Hakeem Jeffries in all of this, given the fact that he has such close ties to the New York State Democratic Party? And is he behind the scenes, like pushing this race and pushing money into it, despite the fact that progressives and others are raising alarm bells about it?
Oh, yeah, certainly. I mean, he's, him and Jacobs, I think, really are, from everything I've been told, are the forces behind the scenes here. I mean, one thing to note, though, that is interesting, despite, how much sort of national, interest and stakes have been kind of drummed up here. Both candidates, this is Suozzi and Pilip, have very publicly said they don't want the presumptive nominees of their respective parties visiting the district, which I think, just kind of goes to show how, unpopular both candidates are, especially in, swing areas. But also Hakeem Jeffries and Speaker Mike Johnson, they did visit the districts. Both candidates made a point of not publicizing those visits either. So even though Hakeem Jeffries is certainly, kind of making moves behind the scenes, the unpopularity and kind of toxicity of the brands of both political parties, so to speak, is definitely kind of, playing a role in that race.
So do you have a sense of like why the big investment if they're both like, they're going to use this as a template, right? This is like they want to pretend that you can run to the right of Republicans on immigration because they're locked in now because of Biden's proposal, and they've put it on the table, and they may not actually pass it. It looks like it's not going to go anywhere legislatively, but as a plank in the platform, it's to the right almost, or they're trying to seem like it's to the right of the Republicans. And this is, I think, a fool's errand. I mean, if it doesn't work if it doesn't buy you much of a margin in a blue state, there's no reason to believe it's going to buy you a margin in a state that is already inclined to believe the Republicans on this issue anyways. Why are they pouring so much money into it? And at the same time, which presumably is because they want to set up a template or a paradigm for the national race, yet they're also afraid of nationalizing it by, mentioning a Democrat or a Republican from outside of the state, where presumably you're not going to be able to get away with that in a presidential election. It all becomes very partisan.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation, which is exactly right. They've nationalized it, and yet it's a total toss-up. So, and I think if you talk to people there, even if it's, even if Suozzi wins, with a razor-thin margin, given the kind of scorched rubble that was left by Santos, that's not exactly much of a defining victory. And again, it's not just that the race is going to be redecided in several months. It's also that there was this ruling that came down from the New York Supreme Court in December that there's going to be another round of redistricting. They, ruled some of the districting from 2022, unconstitutional by the state laws. So they're going to redraw them. And Democrats were rejoicing this decision because the Democratic majority in the state legislature in Albany is going to have a substantial role. So this district is probably going to be more favorable for Democrats in November. And it just kind of makes it even less justifiable for House leadership to be, spending just a ridiculous amount of money for this special election.
Do you know what the status of that redistricting is? Because I thought it was supposed to be like we would hear something by now.
Yeah, I think there's actually supposed to be news later this week on that, but we're not exactly sure what the composition of the district will like. We just kind of assume that it's going to be probably more favorable for Democrats.
All right, and lastly, how much do you think the snow is going to impact things? Do we have a sense of what early voting has looked like? Or traditionally, I know that Democrats tend to do more early voting than Republicans in this district, but it's unclear, right?
Yeah, you and I have the same inside sources on the ground. It's snowing there in Long Island. I mean, what we do know is that Republicans yesterday were already kind of crying foul about, election interference via the weather. They'd actually called on Kathy Hochul to postpone the elections, which she did not do. But yeah, I mean, they assume at this point Democrats, and which is kind of true, that there's more early voting for Democratic voters, and they think this will kind of put Republicans at a disadvantage for a day of voting. So we'll see what happens there.
Who's in charge of plowing the streets out there? That's what I want to know.
Right.
That's really one of the bigger questions.
It's Taylor Swift.
Yeah, Taylor Swift is Kelsey out there, blocking the snowplow trucks.
They do it all.
Luke Goldstein, writing fellow at the American Prospect. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.